When I found out that my parents had sold my grandmother's house, I was standing in the kitchen with a cup of tea in my hand. I remember looking at the steam rising from the cup and thinking that something about the morning felt wrong. My mother had called me earlier and said, "There is something you need to know about Grandma's house." Her voice was calm, too calm. I asked her what had happened. She paused for several seconds. Then she said, "We sold it." I did not answer. For a moment, I honestly thought I had misunderstood her. Sold what? Your grandmother's house. I looked toward the window. Outside, the morning was quiet. A few birds were sitting on the fence. The same fence my grandmother had painted herself many years earlier. But why? I asked. My mother sighed. Because Grandma cannot manage it anymore. Your father and I handled everything. I remember putting my cup down very slowly. Did Grandma agree? Another silence. Then my mother said, "She did not need to. We were doing what was best for her." That was the moment I knew something was terribly wrong. Because my grandmother was not a helpless woman. She was 81 years old, but she still made her own decisions. She still paid her own bills. She still woke up early every morning. And most importantly, that house was not simply a building to her. It was the place where she had raised her children. It was the place where my grandfather had lived until the final days of his life. It was the place where my mother had grown up. And it was the place where I had spent almost every summer of my childhood. I could still remember the smell of Grandma's kitchen. Fresh bread, cinnamon, coffee, old wooden cupboards, the little radio she always kept near the sink. I could still see the chair where my grandfather used to sit every evening. So when my mother told me the house was sold, I felt something inside me become very still. I asked her one more question. Where is Grandma? She is staying with us for now. For now. Yes. I knew then that there was more to the story. What I did not know was that my grandmother had already discovered what my parents were planning months before they sold the house. And while everyone believed she was unaware, confused, and too old to understand what was happening, Grandma had been quietly preparing for the day they would betray her. She had a plan. She had documents. She had one final decision that nobody in our family knew about. And when the truth finally came out, my parents realized they had made the biggest mistake of their lives. But before I tell you what Grandma had done, you need to understand why that house meant so much to all of us. Because some houses are made of bricks and wood. And some houses are made of memories. Grandma's house was both. My grandmother's name was Eleanor. Everyone called her Grandma Ellie. She had been married to my grandfather Robert for 56 years. They were not a perfect couple. I knew that even as a child. They disagreed about small things. My grandfather liked the television loud. Grandma liked quiet. He wanted the windows open. She complained about the cold. He believed every problem could be fixed with a screwdriver. She believed some problems needed a conversation. But they loved each other deeply. You could see it in the smallest things. Every morning Grandpa would make Grandma coffee. Every evening, Grandma would leave a plate of food covered on the stove for him. Even if he said he was not hungry. They understood each other without saying much. They bought the house shortly after they were married. It was not large. There were 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a small kitchen, a living room, and a narrow hallway that always seemed too dark in winter. But they loved it. My mother, Linda, was their only daughter. She grew up there. She learned to ride a bicycle in the driveway. She went to school from that house. She brought her first boyfriend home. She got married in the backyard. And years later, she brought me there as a little girl. That house became part of my childhood too. I remember sleeping in the small guest room during summer vacations. Grandma would open the window before bed. The curtains would move gently in the night breeze. Sometimes I could hear crickets outside. Sometimes I could hear Grandpa coughing down the hallway. And every morning, Grandma would knock softly on the door. "Are you awake, sweetheart?" I would pretend to be asleep. She always knew. "Come on," she would say. "Breakfast is waiting." I loved those mornings. There was something safe about them. Nothing was rushed. Nobody cared about phones. Nobody was looking at a clock. Grandma believed breakfast should be eaten slowly. She believed people should sit together. And she believed family problems should never be discussed at the dinner table. "Dinner is for peace," she used to tell me. I did not understand that when I was young. I understand it now. As I grew older, I moved away. I went to college. I found a job. I got married. Life became busy. But I never stopped visiting Grandma. At least I tried not to. My parents lived about 20 minutes from her house. They visited more often than I did. For years, I believed they were taking good care of her. There was no reason for me to think otherwise. Whenever I called Grandma, she would say, "Your mother was here yesterday." Or, "Your father fixed the back door." Or, "They brought groceries." I felt relieved. I thought she was surrounded by family. I never imagined that the people she trusted most were slowly making decisions about her life without her. Everything changed after Grandpa died. He had been sick for almost a year. Grandma stayed beside him through every appointment. She cooked his favorite meals. She sat beside his bed. She held his hand. And on the final night, she did not leave him. When Grandpa passed away, the house became painfully quiet. I remember visiting 2 days later. Grandma was sitting in his old chair. The television was off. The curtains were closed. There was a plate of food on the table. She had not touched it. I sat beside her. She looked at me and said, "It is strange." "What is?" "Having a house full of memories and nobody to talk to." I held her hand. She squeezed mine. "I am still here," I told her. She smiled. "I know. That was Grandma. She never asked for pity. She never complained. Even when she was hurting, she tried to make other people comfortable." After Grandpa's death, my mother began visiting more often. First, I was grateful. My mother would bring groceries. She would clean the kitchen. She would organize Grandma's medicine. My father started handling repairs. Everything seemed normal. But slowly things began to change. My mother started talking about the house. "It is too much for Grandma," she said one evening. I was visiting my parents. I looked at her. "What do you mean?" "The stairs. The yard. The repairs. Grandma seems fine. She is 81. She is still independent." My mother shook her head. "You are not there every day." That sentence stayed with me. Maybe she was right. Maybe I did not understand how difficult things had become. So I did not argue. A few weeks later, my mother mentioned selling the house. I thought she was only discussing possibilities. She said, "If Grandma moved somewhere smaller, she would be safer." I asked Grandma about it. She laughed softly. "Oh, your mother has been talking about that?" "Yes." Grandma looked toward the window. "I am not leaving this house." "Did you tell her?" "I have told her many times." "Then why does she keep asking?" Grandma smiled. "Because sometimes people hear what they want to hear." I thought that was all it was. A disagreement between a mother and daughter. I did not know how serious it had become. A few months later, my mother called me again. She said Grandma was forgetting things. She said Grandma had become confused. She said it was becoming difficult to manage the house. I immediately went to visit. When I arrived, Grandma was in the kitchen. She was making soup. She looked perfectly calm. "Hi, sweetheart," she said. I hugged her. "How are you?" "Tired. Mom says you have been forgetting things." Grandma stopped stirring the soup. She looked at me. "Does she?" "Yes." Grandma turned off the stove. Then she sat at the table. "Do you believe her?" I did not know what to say. "I don't know." "That is fair." She looked down at her hands. Then she said something I will never forget. "Your mother has been trying to sell this house for months." I stared at her. "I know she wants you to move." "No." Grandma shook her head. "She does not want me to move." "What does she want?" "The house." I felt a chill. "Why?" Grandma smiled sadly. "You will have to ask her." I did not want to believe it. My mother had always been difficult at times, but I could not imagine her selling Grandma's house without permission. Grandma seemed to understand what I was thinking. "Do not fight with your mother because of me." "I am not going to fight." "Good." She stood up and returned to the soup. Then she said quietly, "Sometimes the truth needs time." I looked at her. "What does that mean?" She smiled. "You will understand." I thought she was simply speaking like an old woman who had learned to accept difficult things. I was wrong. Very wrong. A month later, My parents told the family that Grandma had agreed to sell the house. They said the house was too expensive to maintain. They said Grandma had become too old to live alone. They said they were helping her. I received a message from my mother. We have finally sold Grandma's house. She will be staying with us. I read the message several times. Then I called Grandma. She answered. Hello, sweetheart. Mom says the house is sold. Yes. My heart dropped. Did you agree? Grandma was silent for a moment. Then she said, No. I felt confused. What? They sold it. But they cannot sell it without you. I know. Then how did they? They did not. I stopped breathing for a second. What do you mean? Grandma laughed gently. Come over. I drove there immediately. When I arrived, my parents were already inside. My mother looked angry. My father looked tired. Grandma was sitting in her chair. Calm. Still. Almost peaceful. My mother stood up. You should not be here. I looked at her. I was invited. This is a family matter. Grandma spoke. She is family. My mother looked away. Then my father said, We sold the property. Grandma nodded. Yes. My mother said, We had no choice. Grandma looked at her. You had many choices. You were no longer able to manage it. I managed it yesterday. You are 81. I am. And you cannot live alone forever. I did not say I would. My mother looked confused. What does that mean? Grandma smiled. It means I made arrangements. My mother looked at my father. He looked worried. Then Grandma reached for the brown envelope. She placed it on the table. I knew you were planning to sell the house. My mother became pale. Grandma continued. I knew when you started asking about the property. My mother said nothing. I knew when you collected my mail. Still nothing. I knew when you brought papers for me to sign. My father looked down. Grandma said, And I knew when you spoke to the buyer. My mother whispered, How? Grandma looked at her. Because the buyer contacted my lawyer. The room became silent. My father stood up. What? Grandma looked at him. The person you thought was buying the house from you contacted the person who legally represented me. My mother sat down. I could see the fear in her face. Grandma was not angry. That made it even more powerful. She simply said, You sold something that was not yours to sell. My mother began crying. I was trying to help you. Grandma nodded. I know you will say that. I was. Then why did you hide it? My mother could not answer. Grandma waited. Finally, my mother whispered, Because I knew you would say no. Grandma closed her eyes for a moment. That is the truth. Nobody spoke. Then Grandma said something that broke my heart. I would have said no because I wanted to stay in my home. My mother covered her face. I was scared, she said. Of what? That you would die there alone. Grandma looked at her. I may die there someday. My mother began crying harder. Grandma's voice remained soft. But I would rather make that decision myself. That evening my parents left. I stayed with Grandma. We sat in the kitchen. The same kitchen where I had eaten pancakes as a child. The same table. The same radio. The same old clock. But everything felt different. I asked her, What happens now? She looked at me. I am not going to punish your mother. You should not have to. No. She smiled. But I also will not pretend nothing happened. She told me that the legal sale could not go through because she had never authorized it. The house was still hers. The buyer had already been informed. My parents had to admit what they had done. There would be consequences. But Grandma did not want revenge. She wanted control over her own life. That was the difference. A few days later my mother came back. She came alone. She stood at the front door for several minutes before knocking. Grandma opened it. Neither of them spoke. Finally my mother said, Can I come in? Grandma stepped aside. They sat together in the living room. I was not there. I later learned what they talked about. My mother apologized. Not once. Many times. She admitted that she had been thinking about money. She admitted she believed the house was worth more than Grandma needed. She admitted she had convinced herself that selling it was practical. And she admitted something even harder. She had started thinking of the house as an inheritance before Grandma was even gone. That sentence changed everything. Because sometimes people do not realize how cruel they have become until they hear themselves say the truth aloud. Grandma listened. Then she said, "You were already planning what to do with my life after I was gone." My mother cried. "I am sorry." Grandma looked at her. "I believe you." That surprised my mother. "But forgiveness does not mean I trust you immediately." My mother nodded. "I understand." Grandma reached for her hand. "I am still your mother." My mother cried harder. "And I am still your daughter." "Yes." They sat there holding hands. Not everything was fixed that day, but something began to heal. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing things I had ignored before. My mother stopped letting Grandma handle her own paperwork. She began saying, "I will take care of that." She started collecting letters from the mailbox. She kept receipts. She asked questions about the house insurance. She asked me once if I knew how much the property was worth. I said, "Why?" She shrugged. "I am just curious." I knew then that something was happening. I called Grandma. She did not sound worried. "Are you okay?" I asked. "Yes. Mom keeps asking about the house." "I know. What are you going to do?" Grandma paused. Then she said, "I already did." I sat up. "What did you do?" "You will see." "Grandma, please." She laughed softly. "You always were impatient." "I am serious." "So am I." She would not tell me more. I became frustrated, but she sounded so calm that I decided to trust her. A week later, my father called. He rarely called me. He said, "Your mother thinks it would be best if you stayed out of the house situation." "What house situation?" He sighed. "Your grandmother's house." "Why?" "It is a family matter." I said, "She is my grandmother." "I know. And it is her house." He did not answer. That silence told me more than his words could have. I asked, "Are you planning to sell it?" He said, "We are trying to make a responsible decision." "For who?" He hung up. That night I could not sleep. I kept thinking about Grandma, about the house, about my parents. I wanted to believe there was some misunderstanding. I wanted to believe my parents were acting out of concern. But deep down I knew something was wrong. 3 weeks later, Grandma called me. "Come tomorrow," she said. "Why?" "I want to show you something." "What?" "Tomorrow." That was all. The next morning I drove to her house. The front door was unlocked. I walked inside. The house smelled like coffee. Grandma was sitting at the kitchen table. Beside her was a small brown envelope. She looked at me and smiled. "Sit down." I sat. She pushed the envelope toward me. "What is this?" "Open it." Inside were several documents. I did not understand them at first. There was a property document, a legal letter, a copy of her will, and another paper with a date from several months earlier. I looked at Grandma. "What am I looking at?" She said, "The truth." I read through the papers slowly. Then I understood. Months earlier, before my parents had tried to sell the house, Grandma had met with a lawyer. She had changed the legal arrangements surrounding the property. The house could not simply be sold by my parents. It was protected. But there was more. Grandma had also created a plan for the future of the house. I looked at her. "You knew." She nodded. "I knew they were going to try." "How?" She smiled. "Your mother forgot that I raised her." I did not understand. Grandma continued. "She always thought I was not paying attention." She looked toward the hallway. "But I have been paying attention my whole life." Then she told me what had happened. My mother had started bringing papers for Grandma to sign. She said they were insurance forms, then maintenance papers, then documents related to the property. Grandma signed nothing. Instead, she began making copies of everything. She kept notes. She wrote down dates. She wrote down conversations. She spoke privately with a lawyer. And she made one decision. She would not fight my parents with anger. She would let them reveal themselves. I was shocked. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I did not want you caught in the middle." "But Grandma." She reached across the table. "I knew you would choose me." "I would have." "I know." She smiled. "That is exactly why I kept you out of it." I looked down at the documents. What happens now? Grandma took a breath. That depends on what they do. I did not know that they had already made their move. A year later, Grandma decided to make one more change. She wanted the house to remain in the family, but she did not want anyone to fight over it after she was gone. So she created a clear plan. She left instructions about the house. She made sure everyone understood them. And she told us all together, "My house is not a prize." Nobody spoke. It is not something you earn by being the favorite child. My mother looked down. It is not something you deserve because you helped me. She looked at my father. And it is not something you take because you think I am too old to object. My father nodded. Grandma smiled. I want this house to be remembered as a place where people came together. Then she looked at me. You understand? I nodded. Yes. She smiled. Good. She had outsmarted my parents months before they ever realized she knew what they were doing. But that was not her greatest victory. Her greatest victory was keeping control of her own life without becoming bitter. She could have destroyed my parents. She could have embarrassed them. She could have taken them to court and spent years fighting. Instead, she chose something harder. She chose boundaries. She chose truth. And she chose forgiveness without surrendering her dignity. Sometimes I think about that morning when my mother called me. We sold Grandma's house. Those words once made me feel helpless. Today they remind me of something else. They remind me that appearances can be misleading. My parents thought they were making decisions for Grandma. They thought they were protecting her. They thought she was too old to notice. They were wrong. She noticed everything. She simply refused to react with anger. She watched. She prepared. She protected herself. And when the time came, she told the truth. Quietly. Clearly. Without shouting. That was Grandma's strength. Not revenge. Not money. Not power. Wisdom. She understood something I was too young to understand. You do not always have to fight loudly to stand your ground. Sometimes the strongest person in the room is the one who stays calm. The one who knows the truth. The one who refuses to be pushed into a decision. And the one who can forgive without forgetting the lesson. Grandma lived in that house for many more years. Every time I visited, I walked through the same front door. I smelled the same coffee. I heard the same clock. And sometimes, when the afternoon light came through the kitchen window, I could almost imagine Grandpa sitting in his old chair. The house had changed a little. The paint was older. The roof needed work. The garden was not as perfect. But the house still felt like home. One afternoon, Grandma and I were sitting in the kitchen. She was looking through an old box of photographs. She handed me one. It was a picture of me as a little girl. I was standing beside her in the garden. My hair was messy. My dress was covered in dirt. And Grandma was laughing. I smiled. I remember that day. You fell into the flower bed. I was looking for a butterfly. You destroyed my flowers. I was little. You were trouble. We laughed. Then Grandma became quiet. She looked at the photograph for a long time. I am glad you remember this place. I always will. She nodded. Good. Then she said something very softly. A house is only valuable when the people inside it feel safe. I looked at her. She smiled. And you should never stay where you have to beg to be respected. I knew she was not only talking about the house. She was talking about life. About family. About every relationship where love and control can become confused. I took her hand. Thank you. For what? For teaching me. She smiled. I did not teach you everything. No. No. She looked toward the window. Life taught you the rest. A few weeks later, Grandma made another decision. She did not want to live alone forever. But she also did not want to leave the house simply because other people thought she should. So she hired someone to help with cleaning. She arranged for regular yard work. She updated her medical contacts. She made a plan for emergencies. And she kept the house. My mother began visiting again. This time she did not bring paperwork. She brought groceries. Sometimes she cooked. Sometimes she simply sat with Grandma. The relationship was different. There was less pretending. More honesty. One afternoon I visited both of them. They were sitting at the kitchen table. Grandma was teaching my mother how to make her cinnamon bread. My mother was struggling. Grandma laughed. You are putting too much sugar. I like sugar. You always did. I stood in the doorway and watched them. For the first time in months I felt peaceful. I realized something. The house had never been the real issue. The real issue was whether my grandmother's voice still mattered. She had spent her entire life caring for other people. And when she finally needed people to respect her choices, the people closest to her almost forgot she was still a person with dreams, wishes, and a voice. That was the painful part. Not the money. Not the property. The disrespect. Months passed. Grandma remained in her house. She celebrated her 82nd birthday there. The family gathered around the same dining table. My father brought flowers. My mother baked a cake. I brought an old photograph of Grandma and Grandpa from their wedding day. When Grandma opened the frame, she became quiet. She touched the glass with her fingers. Then she smiled. He was so handsome. My mother laughed. He thought he was. We all laughed. It was a small moment, but it meant everything. The house was still standing. The family was still together. And Grandma was still the center of the room. Later that evening I went outside with her. We sat on the back porch. The sky was dark. The yard was quiet. She looked at me. Do you know what I learned? What? People often confuse being old with being powerless. I smiled. That sounds like something you would say. She laughed. I have had 82 years to learn a few things. Then she became serious. I was afraid. Of what? That I would lose my family because I refused to give up my house. I looked at her. You did not. No. She looked toward the house. But I almost lost them because they forgot to listen. I did not know what to say. She reached for my hand. Always remember something. What? Love does not give us permission to control people. I nodded. She continued. You can worry about someone. You can help them. You can advise them. But you cannot take away their choices just because you think you know better. Those words stayed with me. If there is one thing I carry with me from that experience, it is this. We should be careful when we say we are doing something for someone. Sometimes we truly are. Sometimes we are helping. But sometimes those words hide something else. Our fear. Our greed. Our impatience. Our desire to control the outcome. My parents believed they were making a practical decision. But they forgot the most important person in the decision. Grandma. They forgot to ask what she wanted. They forgot that age does not erase a person's right to choose. And they almost destroyed the trust between a mother and her children. Thankfully, they realized their mistake before it was too late. Not every family gets that chance. Some betrayals cannot be repaired. Some words cannot be taken back. Some doors close forever. That is why I believe we should listen before we decide. Ask before we assume. Help before we control. And love people while they are still here to hear us say it. Grandma's house was never just about property. It was about dignity. It was about memory. It was about the right to say, this is my life, and I still get to decide what happens to it. My parents learned that lesson the hard way. I learned it by watching. And Grandma. She taught us all without ever raising her voice. Years later, whenever I walk past that old house, I still think about the little girl I used to be. The girl who slept in the guest room. The girl who waited for Grandma to call her to breakfast. The girl who thought that house would always be there. In some ways I was right. Because even if one day the house is gone, the memories will remain. The smell of cinnamon. The sound of the old clock. Grandpa's chair. Grandma's laughter. And the quiet strength of a woman who refused to let anyone decide her future for her. She never needed to punish my parents. She only needed to protect herself. And perhaps that was the greatest lesson of all. You can love your family deeply and still say no. You can forgive someone and still keep boundaries. You can understand why someone hurt you without allowing them to hurt you again. And sometimes the person everyone thinks is powerless is the person who has already thought 3 steps ahead. Grandma did not win because she kept a house. She won because she kept her voice. She kept her dignity. And in the end she kept her family too. That is what I remember most. Not the papers. Not the failed sale. Not the arguments. I remember the afternoon she sat beside me in her kitchen and said, people often confuse being old with being powerless. She was right. And I will never forget it. Because sometimes the quietest person in the room has already seen everything. Sometimes they are simply waiting for the right moment to speak. And sometimes, the secret plan is not revenge. It is simply having the courage to protect yourself.